Hey guys, Gijoe here, and welcome back to my bunker here in Atlanta, Georgia. We were discussing, or continuing rather, our Bloodbath series. This is episode 9, and we're going to be discussing Naval Blockades. Okay, the Naval Blockade card is card number 7 in the Bloodbath deck that Sireblood has created and that you can purchase on makingplayingcards.com for a cost of $20. Well worth the investment because all of the rules, 17 different cards, all pertaining to the different rules of the Bloodbath house rule set. So let's talk about in depth here for Naval Blockade. And this is a continuation of our rule deck little series that we're doing here. I think we started this on episode 6, doing just kind of a general look at the cards and the ones that are pretty much the same as out of box, or maybe a slight alteration. And then here over the last couple episodes, I think 7, 8, and this one 9, we're getting more in depth into some of these rules that are considerably different than out of box to make sure you understand them. So let's look at the Naval Blockade. Now, if you're familiar with Global 40, you know that one ship can block an entire fleet of opposing navies. So as you well know, a common move for Japan would be moving a destroyer or some type of vessel into 16, and that one ship would essentially block all of this. Okay, now that seems unrealistic, and it actually slows the game down. Okay, so I know that this destroyer probably resembles a fleet of destroyers, but if you're gonna go by that argument, then that fleet of destroyers is now blocking 3 fleets of submarines, a fleet of carriers, a fleet of battleships, a fleet of cruisers, a fleet of destroyers. That just doesn't make sense. So what Sireblood has done here is he has altered the Naval Blockade in this way. It says that each surface warship can block up to 3 warships on your opponent's combat movement phase. So notice it says surface warships. So obviously a submarine in here would not be allowed to be used as a naval blockade, okay? And that's consistent with out-of-box rules. So it had to be a surface warship, okay? Anything other than a submarine. Okay, so that's the first thing. You may not non-combat move through a blockade. Makes sense, okay? And since there are 3 warships selected, the attacker will get to determine what ships are going to be blocked by this destroyer or whatever surface warship is there. Okay, let's continue reading here. It says transports may not pass through unless escorted by a warship with an attack value. So this transport, in order to get, let's say that it's wanting to do an amphibious assault onto Japan, this transport is going to have to be escorted past this destroyer by this blockade. And it has to be a surface warship with an attack value. So let's look at the ships here. We have a sub, we have a destroyer, a cruiser, a battleship, and an aircraft carrier. Well, the sub cannot escort it because it's not a surface warship. An aircraft carrier cannot escort this because the aircraft carrier does not have an attack value, even though it has planes on the deck. So the only ships that can escort a transport through a blockade would be a battleship, a cruiser, or a destroyer. Okay? So let's look at this scenario. Now let's read on here just a little bit more. Submarines may not be chosen as blocked if a blocking warship is not a destroyer. So let's do this. Here is a cruiser as a blockade. So the attacker is coming into this sea zone, and since this is not a destroyer, as it says right here, not a destroyer, then submarines cannot be chosen. So which that means is now the subs cannot be chosen. And then it also says that transports may pass through when escorted by a warship with attack value. So now this means that this carrier cannot escort that through. So it has to be one of these 3 ships. So let's say that the battleship is going to escort the transport. then that means the 3 ships that the attacker picks will be these 3 ships. Okay? Which means the remainder of the fleet will come through, and it will, after this sea zone is cleared, which is phase 1, by the way. Phase 1, attacker chooses which warships will be blocked, and then a battle ensues. If this is cleared, then the remainder of the fleet can come through the blockade and into the next sea zone and conduct the amphibious assault or the other naval battle. All right? Okay? So let's back this up and do this a little differently. Let's say that the Japanese decide to put a destroyer there. Now, if the Americans want to, now they can select the 3 subs because there's a destroyer there. So since there is a destroyer, submarines may be chosen. So it's the opposite of this. So now the United States will pick the 3 subs as chosen, and now everything else, assuming this gets cleared, everything else will come through the sea zone after this battle and conduct the amphibious assault. Now, in the event that this battle is lost, and these are not cleared, these are all killed. Let's say that for some reason this Japanese destroyer kills all these subs. Now this cannot come through here, so they're going to have to wait another turn. Okay, so all of this will remain right here. Okay, and not conduct battle because they were not selected as blocked ships. Okay, now let's look at a different scenario. Since 1 warship, surface warship, blocks 3 warships, if you have 2 warships in here, now you can block 6. All right. So now in this scenario with the same naval units, this destroyer, the attacker can select 3 subs to be blocked by that destroyer. And then this cruiser will block 1, 2, 3. And so now that leaves 1 battleship remaining to escort the transport through to do the amphibious assault. Okay? Now, again, keep in mind that the purpose of BBR is to speed up the game. Okay, SIRED wants to get more units into battle as quickly as possible so that the game does not drag on and drag on. So, in order to play a game in 8 to 10 rounds, 10 hours or so, he wants to, again, get pieces to the front so that battles can happen and a decisive or a decision can be achieved either way. All right, so that's that scenario. Now, let's take 1 ship off of here. Let's take this cruiser out. Or, no, how about this? Let's take a sub out and put everything back. Let's say that this is what happens here. And Japan puts out 2 ships into Sea Zone 16. Okay, which means this is going to block 6 ships. So 2 subs and let's say a destroyer will be picked by the United States to be blocked and conduct battle on this. And then this cruiser now blocks 3 more ships. 1, 2, and the battleship is 3. So now what you have here is a situation where the transport is left by itself, which means regardless of what happens here, let's assume that all of this is killed. That means this transport cannot go through and go to an amphibious assault. And the reason being is right here. Transports may not pass through unless escorted by a warship with an attack value. Okay, so once again, the only thing that can escort a transport would be a battleship, a destroyer, and a cruiser, because those are the only surface warships that have an attack value. All right. I think that should cover it. And like I said, this is considerably different than out of box, but hopefully this will clear up any questions that you may have about Naval Blockade. If you have any more questions, please feel free to write them or ask them below, and hopefully this clears it up. So if you didn't know about Naval Blockade, now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.
Gijoe!